Welcome to this video, the first video covering this year's Tata Steel tournament, and I missed on the first two rounds simply because I was a bit busy and didn't have the time to make the videos. So what I'm going to do is I'll do a recap video here of two games, the two most and in my book interesting and remarkable games of the first three rounds, and then starting with round 4 I'll do a daily recap. Yeah, this year's tournament is slightly different from previous years, as it only has 12 players in the A group instead of 14 players. I guess due to financial reasons they cut down on participants, which in my book is a bit strange. I mean, why not just let's say put in two Dutch juniors in the A group? Nobody would really mind, I guess, and we have you would have one more game per day. It would probably lower the average rating of the tournament a bit, but still it's more interesting to watch. Yeah, still it's a very interesting lineup. We don't have Magnus Carlsen playing, and we don't have Vishy Anand playing. They still recover from the World Championship match, but will return to the tournament arena end of the month or the beginning of February, I think, for the Zurich tournament, the Zurich Chess Challenge. Okay, let's check out games from Tata Steel, Weigansee. The first game I have chosen is from round 2. It features Boris Gelfand playing as white, and of course you're very familiar with Gelfand, probably being the World Championship challenger of 2012, and yeah, it feels like a top 10 player for like 20 years. But he's playing a newcomer here. Black is Richard Rapport from Hungary, and I think this is probably his first major tournament where he's playing all the big guys. He's almost rated 2700 and only, if I'm not mistaken, 17 years old, getting 18 this year, if I'm not mistaken. So a huge talent, obviously, and certainly a player to reckon with. Really remarkable about him is being a big contrast to other young players, is that he's very creative in the opening. He doesn't really have a very well-defined and narrow opening repertoire. He plays all kinds of creative openings, and let's go to this game and we'll see pretty quickly what I'm talking about. So this has been played like millions of times, and what is he going to play now? The Budapest Gambit, one of the real rare openings in top level chess. You don't see that played at all, basically. The only remarkable recent game that comes to mind is the game Aronian against Ivanchuk from the candidates, where Ivanchuk actually got a really good position with black, but blundered it away in his usual time trouble. It doesn't have a great reputation, this opening, but if you study it in some detail, you probably find it is playable. It's not like completely incorrect, but some lines seem to give white some edge. Let's see what Gelfand is playing. He takes, of course, knight g4. Yeah, note that this gambit, the Fejerovitz, is probably entirely incorrect due to a3. But you need to know a bit more than a3, but it doesn't seem to be a good opening. Okay, knight g4, the regular Budapest is played. And here the main move is bishop f4, and this is also what, for example, Aronian played against Ivanchuk. The main point being that this bishop is out of the pawns, out of the pawn chain. If you compare it to the game, Gelfand plays knight f3, and after bishop c5, this attack on f2 forces white to play e3, and yeah, this keeps the bishop locked in. Mostly white is playing bishop f4, and after knight c6, knight f3, bishop b4 check, we get very often this kind of position. This is what I actually recommend for white against the Budapest. Queen e7, e3 captures bishop e2, and this kind of position is playable for black, but it's always a slight edge for white, as quite often black needs to give up this bishop, after which he's solid, but it's not very inspiring. Yeah, but Gelfand plays knight f3, and after bishop c5, e3, knight c6, black will get this pawn back. White can try to keep it for the moment, but it doesn't really help in the long run. This pawn will be will be gone. Yeah, knight c3 here, castles, bishop e2. This is all very logical, and black gets the pawn back. Yeah, I guess this feels very normal, but now Gelfand's plan that he's coming up with, I don't really like, to be honest. And yeah, here white has a number of options. The usual way to play is actually, I think, the move b3 to fianchetto the bishop. And one black plan here, funny one, is to play rook a6 and then swing the rook over to yeah, even try to attack here. This is quite an interesting setup for black, and one of the reasons why the Budapest yeah, has some attraction to players, and in some cases you get quite interesting piece play. Gelfand has another idea. It's interesting, but I'm not sure that ultimately it is a good one. He played king h1, which pretty much tells what white is going to do after d6. No, he's giving up on the idea to play rook a6 for the moment. White is going f4, which was clearly the idea after to play that after king h1, as this king is leaving this critical diagonal, and therefore preparing the f4 push. Yeah, f4, black returns with the knight to c6. And so what did f4 accomplish? Of course, the pawn fulfills a useful role. It controls e5, therefore preventing the knight from staying on e5. But on the other hand, this whole operation did weaken very important squares, and this means mostly e4 and e3. The pawn on e3 now really is backward, and e4 is also a weak spot in white's camp. This can be covered, but the thing is, it very often tends to be yeah, if you start to move pawns like f4 here, you create weaknesses, and sometimes you can get rid of those weaknesses, but in the process you create new ones. This is simply the nature of pawn advances. Let's say white plays e4 at some stage, which makes sure that this pawn is not backward anymore. Well, this weakens d4. Yeah, black would have a nice square after e4, and it also would make this bishop very active. So f4 is really double-edged. It has a good long-term idea, get rid of the knight on e5, but it's questionable in the long run. And we see that rather quickly. I think black gets a decent position played. Now the white's move b3, of course, rook e8, and rook f3. Yeah, it's a problem. How do you actually protect the pawn? And well, this actually can be an idea. Rook g3, bishop b2, knight d5, this kind of plan. But we see that black really quickly gets his pieces out. Bishop f5, eyeing this important square. Yeah, rook g3. And now rook e6, which is a good idea. One idea is to just oppose the rook, make sure it is exchanged. And another idea could be to actually use the rook on h6 to put some pressure on h2. This can also be, yeah, an attractive option. Yeah, here white played the move bishop b3, which looks sensible. Get rid of this active bishop, while e2 didn't do much, and black doesn't have much else than taking. Not a problem at all. And now knight b4, just attack the queen. Yeah, where is it going? It goes to d2, covering e3 and keeping this idea alive. And in this position, black played queen e7, intensifying the pressure on e3. And yeah, white's position is not really harmonious. This is the problem. It's not really coordinated well. Yeah, white really should play e4, and he does. You cannot keep it on e3 all the time, being a weakness. This just makes lots of sense. Yeah, and now queen h4. This is quite an obvious idea, but still it can prove very effective. If you want a little puzzle here, what does black play if white, let's say, plays bishop b2? If you want, pause the video and look for a bit. Okay, I'll tell you now. Probably spotted it yourself. Black now has a very nice move. He can take on g3 with the queen, sacrificing the queen after the capture.
Checkmate.
It's a mate because this bishop is such an active piece, controlling the important g1 square. So queen h4 is yeah, using a very crude threat, but it's effective. White needs to react to that, and he played rook f3, just retreating the rook, which makes sure black cannot take. However, black now has an interesting move at his disposal. He played the flashy move knight c2, which is not bad, but he had an alternative. An interesting move at this position was the very aggressive move f5, which he for some reason did not play, but it seems that this might have been a good idea. The simple reason why this is a good move is, or let's say point, reason is the wrong word. If white captures on f5, very simple, black can, however he wants, play rook e1 or queen e1. It doesn't make a difference. Just mating on the back rank. So white cannot take, but this also means that e4 is attacked, and white really has problems to keep it. He can play rook h3, for example, but black has the good reply queen f2, and this kind of position still involves this threat on e4, and white doesn't really have a great move. I mean, if you go a3, black just retreats and probably will put this knight on an even better square. So after f5, white is in some trouble due to the somewhat artificial setup. But he played knight c2, which is not a bad move, but it does not really yeah, keep an edge for black. Rook b1 and queen e1. This was the idea. Quite unusual to have the knight go such a long way to e1. And yeah, well, black even in this position is completely fine, but the other line was probably even more convincing. Yeah, rook g3 played now, and rook g6. Yeah, and here it starts to get ugly again for white. I think here white should really take on g6 and play bishop d2. I mean, black looks active, but it's not the end of the world. If he goes, let's say, knight d3, you probably need to play g3, get some room for the king. And this piece combination puts some pressure on the center, but it shouldn't be so dramatic. I mean, bishop b4 maybe, king to g2, yeah, something like that. But white has chances to hold here, of course. Black is a bit better, but it feels better than the game. In the game, he played knight d5, and after the capture on g3 and just c6, it really got problematic. I mean, this is just an additional weakness on g3. And what is white supposed to play now? If you play a move like knight e3, for example, just retreating it, then there's this move, and it gets really ugly now. This is a substantial threat, and is also threatening knight c1 and bishop e3. Oh, this looks funky. Yeah, well, black has lots of pressure here. Hard to defend the pawn. There's even the simple idea, rook e8 and taking it. And what is white supposed to do? Yeah, he can instead go to c3. But after knight d3, you're also in trouble. It's similar to the position that I showed before, but now it's a double pawn, and the king is not in the game. In the other line, white could even could activate the king, which is not possible here. And here, probably white is in big trouble. So, oops. So after c6, he played something else. He played the interesting reply bishop e3, attacking the knight on e1, and now we get a quite funny transposition of position. Transposition of position? No, transformation of the position. Black retreats his knight, and now yeah, of course this knight is hanging, and if white moves it, e3 hangs. So white only has this move bishop c5, and now black can take on d5. This is a very important point, that now this bishop is hanging, and yeah, well, okay, it should take, and now black takes on e4. This is quite interesting to see this pawn making this series of captures, and now we have a case where a knight is clearly better than a bishop. In lots of cases, the bishop in an open position is the stronger piece because it simply has those long-range capabilities. But here, the knight on d3 is just an enormous piece. It controls important squares and it supports the pawn, while this king is not really playing. So black here is substantially better and probably should win. Yeah, not taking on g6 really was a costly mistake. It now gets really difficult. King g1 and f5. This is a good move, protecting the important passer on e4. White activates the king, and black activates his rook. This is also quite logical. Bishop to c7, and yeah, it's hard to win any endgame without the king. So king gets into play. And now g4. This certainly makes sense. White needs to activate and undermine this e4 pawn, and especially with this double pawn, which is completely worthless, you should try to play actively. Yeah, rook c6, attacking the bishop, and it took on a5. This was black's idea. Now rook a6 back, and you get this idea to capture on a2. Yeah, here we have a critical position again. White here could have defended much, yeah, in a much trickier way at least. He played bishop c3, which is a relatively easy win for black. He instead could have tried to play b4, which sets a little trap. I guess a trap that probably Rapport would have spotted easily, but still, it's better to have some kind of idea, some trap that the opponent might fall into. You don't know exactly what the time situation was. The clocks here are fairly accurate, so at least Rapport was somewhat down on time. Okay, b4, and what should have black play now? If the big point is, if black plays b6, this is actually not so precise. It looks like the obvious move, trapping the bishop, but in fact after g takes f5, takes, and now b5, it is slightly tricky for black. You can easily run into some trouble. If he retreat, then maybe g4, and these pawns are kept, and if black would capture, you have the c-pawn also as an additional force, or this one. It's a win for black probably, but maybe something that white could have tried to get some pawns rolling. On the other hand, by the way, after b4, black can also just take here, which is the simpler solution. The nice thing about this combination is of pieces, this configuration, that the rook never ever can attack the pawn. It's simply not possible, as the knight on d3 always covers this important square. So b4 wouldn't have saved white, but this may be a bit trickier. He played bishop c3, after which black simply took on a2. And now the rook is even active on the second rank. Yeah, black now should definitely win, and he does a decent job converting, pushing the e-pawn. Yeah, note that the knight also supports the all-important promotion square. So g3. Yeah, black improves the position and fights for his king activity.
Check.
Yeah, and now the king advances.
Check.
And really joins the action, trying to promote the e-pawn. Around here there's more than one way for black to win, but he never really allowed
Check.
anything substantial for white. There were maybe ways to win in quicker, but it's not really essential. Here we see that this combined force with the king, very important, it's really a mating attack. If white now is not taking on e3, which he did, the only move, then he's basically mated after a rook move, for example. There's rook
Check.
g2, and
checkmate.
This is a funny mate. Or this
checkmate.
Kind of a smothered mate with the knight. This is black's threat, so white needs to sacrifice the bishop. There's no choice. Black recaptures, and white can try to do something with the h-pawn.
Check. Check.
It's pretty simple technique here to win some time. Gave some checks, but now it's just in time to stop the pawn.
Check.
Let's put on a couple of more moves.
Check.
And,
check.
Yeah, it was played up to this point, and now Gelfand here resigned. I'm not sure. Probably the first game that he ever lost against the Budapest Gambit, and I don't know when he last played it or played against it. It's a very rare opening in high level chess, but as you see, it really didn't put the black player into big trouble. I mean, Gelfand obviously didn't really have something great prepared, and the Budapest is certainly an opening that you can play from time to time, especially as a surprise weapon. I'm not really sure that I would play that against a player that can really prepare against it, because there are many lines that have some more forced character that you really need to know, and therefore there's some caution certainly advised. But yeah, why not? Surprising your opponent can be a good idea. And as we see, this player, this new interesting player from Hungary, is not afraid to play it in an important tournament game against such a strong opposition. Alright, so this is the first game I was going to show. Let me now pull up the second one. Okay, here we go with the second game. This is from round 3, played today. And we have Caruana playing against Karjakin, so two promising young players. Let's see what we get. Caruana playing d4. He plays many different openings. He also plays e4 as white, so very versatile repertoire. Karjakin, on the other hand, is especially with black, he's got a very narrow repertoire. Always basically after d4 responding with knight f6 and e6. He's playing the Nimzo, and he's playing the Queen's Indian usually. But against the g3, of course, we get the Catalan. So let's proceed. This is actually the line that Karjakin has played numerous times, and it's essentially the main line. Black develops in the most natural and conservative fashion with castles and bishop e7, and after that takes on c4. Yeah, the capture on c4 is not really designed to win a pawn. White can easily get it back, but the point of this recapture is that the Catalan bishop on g2 obviously has no way to recapture the pawn. In the Queen's Gambit, usually the bishop is on f1 and can easily regain the pawn, which is not possible here. So the point is White needs to lose time with his pieces to get the pawn back, and this is used by Black to increase, or let's say to gain some other things. For example, some time for development. Caruana plays the most usual move. Yeah, here there's also queen c2, queen a4 is a similar line. It makes sure to get the pawn back. And here we see one idea. After a6, queen takes, b5. Black has gained time on the queen and manages to develop his bishop on b7 to oppose the all-important Catalan bishop. So this has been played thousands of times and is Karjakin's main weapon as Black against the Catalan. Yeah, now bishop d2. This funky looking idea is actually the idea of bishop d2, or the idea is one point. Let's say there are many more, but this is one point. Bishop d2 is not the most natural move, of course. It looks much more natural to play a move like bishop f4, for example, or bishop g5, let's say. But both of these moves have the disadvantage that they somehow simplify the position a bit early. After bishop f4, it's also a problem or an issue that this bishop quite often gets attacked by a knight. Quite often like this. Now this is an interesting line, but it's ultimately okay for Black. Bishop g5 is very safe, but ultimately not very ambitious. Bishop d2 is the most ambitious move, of course. Yeah, bishop d6 now is played. This is one possible line. It covers c7, so it anticipates bishop a5. It gives the queen a potential square on e7, and it supports the move e5 in the long run. Black can try to play knight d7 and e5, for example. If white now played a3, but if he plays bishop a5, which is not so great, Black plays knight c6. This is important, attacking the bishop. So this bishop a5 move is really mostly interesting if Black goes for a knight bd7 type of development. Then bishop a5 makes sense because it cannot be kicked with knight c6 early on. Yeah, okay, White's move is a3, which is a bit weird at first if you don't know the position. But if you have seen some games in this opening, it feels rather normal to have this little pawn move. Yeah, why is that? It's a multi-purpose move. It does many good things. One thing is it prepares the move b4. b4 can be a good move because it makes sure that Black never ever moves the c-pawn. This backward c-pawn is in fact the main source of conflict in this position type. It very often can be reduced to one simple task for Black. If Black manages to just play c5 and exchange those pawns, c against d pawn, then he will easily equalize. If he does not manage to do that and never ever moves the pawn, then this pawn can be a long-term issue and problem. We see in the game what happens. A3. This also, by the way, yeah, it's quite a good waiting move, because, well, bishop a5 is something you want to play, but you want to do it maybe more after knight d7. So black now, yeah, needs to commit in a way. He played knight d7 as mentioned, and now bishop a5 is the usual way to go. However, he played b4, quite interesting. Bishop a5 here is very normal, but the move b4 that Caruana chose is also interesting. After bishop a5, one problem for white is that after, let's say, queen b8, threatening c5, and now it's a bit tricky. How is white supposed to play now? If you now play a b4, black has e5, or he has got this potential idea, knight b6 to c4. It's not so clear what this bishop is doing, but I think this is probably the more convincing way to go. It's not clear that this is such a great position at the moment. Yeah, he played b4, and therefore absolutely making sure that black is never ever playing c5 quickly. However, black can go for e5. We'll see that in the game. Rook a7. This is in fact a fairly typical move in this structure. It prepares queen a8, fianchettoing the queen, but it's also a bit artificial. It's not clear that this is really a necessary move, but what are black's alternatives? He could have tried to play e5. Let's check this. After e5, white has got this simple reply. Knight e5, oops, knight e5. And now after bishop takes g2, white has the funny move knight takes f7, and this is probably why black didn't go for that. After rook f7, king g2, yeah, white is a pawn up. It's not entirely clear though after c5. Still, it looks like a somewhat weird way to play. After c5, b takes c5, there's rook c8, and black is really active. It's not a big deal that he lost a pawn if you look at those somewhat clumsy pieces. However, this is a weird line to play, and white, of course, does not necessarily need to grab this pawn. Okay, but rook a7 is not bad. What needs to be mentioned actually, instead of rook a7, knight b6 is also a move, and this has been played by Karjakin last year in Vike against Peter Lecko, which ended in a draw later. But okay, we've got rook a7 now, a new idea. Yeah, and here white went bishop c3. Bishop c3 actually seems to be a new move. In another game, knight c3 was played, and a very prominent game. In last year's London Candidates, Carlsen played knight c3 against Aronian. Knight c3, queen a8, and knight to h4 was the continuation, and it very quickly petered out to a draw. It was a very dull game actually. Okay, so bishop c3 is Caruana's new idea, and it makes some sense. I mean, this bishop on c3 now controls the important e5 square, so that e5 is not easily played, and knight d2 and e4. If white gets those two moves in, he's in really good shape. So black needs to react to that, and he better do that now. Bishop e4, a good move, attacking the queen and making sure that knight d2 e4 is not coming. Queen moves away, and queen a8, very logical. Knight bd2, and black puts it back. Of course, you cannot allow white to take this all-important bishop, so he needs to retreat. And now queen c2. Yeah, now we have a situation where white is pretty close to playing e4. So black needs to be cautious about that. Knight b6 makes sense, yeah? Looking at those two weakened squares, and at the moment the control over e4 is completely sufficient. Now knight e1. Now it is a threat, and black needs to react to that. He responds with knight a4, which is an interesting way to play. Now after e4, black can take on c3 and wins a pawn. After taking, you can just recapture here, and black is a pawn up. Quite funny. And after queen takes, there's just this capture, and black is winning a pawn and also enjoys a huge positional edge. So just a blunder. After knight a4, white needs to react, and he plays knight b3. This is a change of plan. I mean, white really acknowledges that he will not be able to play e4. But knight b3 is a useful move. It looks at two important squares. And well, black, with all those ideas that are nice, queen a8 and knight to a4, he still has not solved his issues with the pawns. He has not played c5, he has not played a5, and he has not played e5. So ultimately the structure is unchanged. And if you imagine this structure with a different material distribution, it can easily be very tricky for black, and we see that that in the game. Black now played bishop to e4, after which white recaptured queen a4, queen e4, and rook a2. So it is a question now. What should black do now? He I don't really like the move to be honest, but it's not easy to play, of course, but I don't really like what he's doing now. He takes on c3 with this knight, and I understand that the bishop on c3 is not a piece that is is hurting black very much at the moment, but it influences very important squares. But it still doesn't feel like a great piece. Yeah, well, he took it. He took it because he wants to play e5, but I'm not sure about that at all, if this is so helpful. After knight f3 now, black is essentially forced to take on d4 because of the pressure on e5. And he also needed to play e5. If you give white some time for, let's say, knight d3, knight c5, rook here, he will slowly but surely put pressure on the pawns, especially c7, of course. So you need to do something. So e5 is very understandable. But if you look at this, knight f3, it now attacks e5. Black needs to take, and now the knight takes. And now we see that a very important motif is entering the position, or is introduced in the position. And this is a very typical feature of this Catalan pawn structure. When black is not managing to push c5, it will be very important to fight, if you're black, to fight the idea of a knight appearing on c6. A knight on c6 is just an absolutely devastating piece. It controls b8, d8, a5, so it freezes the whole structure and controls so many important squares that it's really, really ugly. And black somehow drifts into this type of position now. I don't really like the sequence of taking on c3 and playing e5. It looks logical, but it feels like black is getting into trouble here. We see just a couple of moves later that this rather nightmarish position is really emerging. Rook c2, knight d5, and queen f3. And now black really needs to exchange queens. No way to avoid it, and this is also not what you want to do, really. Okay, but but let's advance a couple of moves, and we see this square is all important. The knight on a5 is very useful. It covers the important c4 square, so knight c4 is not an option. And note that this bishop on d6 is only really good for protecting c7. It's not attacking anything and cannot easily move, as c7 is just lost if you move it. So it's just a very passive position. But I think that Caruana is now playing in a really excellent fashion. It's not so difficult for a player of his strength, but it's still very nice to see how he does it. In a very, very slow manner, he pushes his kingside majority. Note that this ultimately is the second trump that white can use. He's got 4 pawns against 3 pawns, and while these pawns can actually advance and be he's able to get a passer at the end, those 3 pawns against 2 pawns will never be a factor, as black can never play c5. And in fact we see rather quickly that a couple of moves later, note, you always need to block the c pawn. Just make sure that it is never moving. This has an additional idea, tying the knight on b6. And white has lots of time. He does not need to rush in any way. Have all the time in the world. Very important. At the end, you want to advance the pawns. So f4. Black can just sit and wait. No way to move anything active. And now at the end, you're preparing. White is preparing to sink a knight on c6.
Check.
And here we go. Look at this knight. It completely kills off black's position. This rook, it cannot oppose on the d file. It cannot move. It can only go to c8 at the moment. And the knight on c6 is just obviously stopping the pawn. Black has no active play whatsoever. It's just terrible. After knight a5, you're even covering c4, so that knight c4 is no idea. And white's play now is, after all this really careful and thorough preparation, white's play now seems extremely easy, but this is because it is so nicely prepared. White now just needs to push the pawns on the king side. This is why black played f5. This maybe is not the best defense, but it's very difficult to give some advice to black because you're so passive. After g4, white opens up the position.
Check.
And it's really easy now for white, just advancing and using the big advantage in space. This being the next threat, black needs to cover that, but you can still just push the pawns.
Check.
This is of course desperation, but what is black's move? I mean, it's almost Zugzwang. It's this additional idea. If black moves the knight, for example, you just play it like that. And here it's a question. You can even go here and get this into the game. But there's also c7 hanging. Black plays this desperation move.
Check.
But still, it's a piece now.
Check.
And Caruana has no trouble to convert, especially because this is such a ridiculously bad rook. It can be only activated via e8, but this leads to losses on the queen side. Karjakin actually played this on for a while, quite surprisingly, because there's really zero chance of rescue.
Check.
And only after a couple more moves.
Check.
In fact, after that, he actually resigned. Rook e1, king e1, knight d3, winning the rook, which leaves white with two extra knights and two pawns. So a very, very nice strategical display by Caruana, and somewhat of a model game. The tricky thing, of course, is it's quite clear if you look at let's say this position. I mean, it's very obvious for a player of Karjakin's strength and also for weaker players that black is in big trouble here. But still he managed to, yeah, he got into this position. And I'm not 100% sure, because the time I could dedicate to analyze the game is limited, of course. But to be honest, I don't like this transformation much with e5, because it really gets white's knights into the game, and this really, the control over c6 here is really becoming the most annoying factor in the position. I think black probably shouldn't take on c3 and play e5, but very difficult to play. After that, with white having such a nice edge, black is in big trouble. But Caruana played it in an excellent way, never ever allowing any sort of counterplay. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed those two games of the Tata Steel tournament. There have been some more interesting ones, but okay, time is limited. I don't want to do a 2-hour video, so I think it's good to just have two games in some detail. All right, thanks for watching. I'll be back soon with regular coverage of the next individual rounds, when I will look briefly at all games. Thanks for watching.